All right. Hey, good afternoon, folks. Once again, we are back taking a look at the tropics. Today is Saturday, October 5th, 2024. This is your afternoon tropical update. We have another storm forming on our hands in the Gulf of Mexico. This is something we've been talking about for probably more than a week now, and things changed with this a few times, but now they're starting to quickly come into place. We have a new tropical depression in the Gulf of Mexico, and it is expected to impact Florida with significant impacts possible in the middle of this week. This is our system down here in the western Gulf of Mexico, today, starting to get going. We have a cold front draped across the southeast U.S. with fall weather moving into parts of the central and eastern U.S. But of course, in the southeast, fall for us just means hurricanes in football instead of, just football for everybody else. Looking at the rest of the Atlantic Basin real quick, we do have Hurricane Kirk and Hurricane Leslie. Both of these storms are recurving out into the open Atlantic and will not be a threat. We have more stuff coming off of Africa, but again, not likely to be a threat this time of year. But these homegrown systems like Helene and now Tropical Depression 14 are becoming quite the problem. So you can see the overall map here today, but most of our video is going to be on TD14. Let's go ahead and look at the National Hurricane Center's first advisory. This came out pretty quick this morning. They made it Invest 92L earlier in the morning, and then at 11 o'clock decided to go ahead and pull the trigger. So what we have is actually the leftovers of that old trough that went across Mexico and kind of sat around here. And then we had some tropical juice come up from the south, from TD11 in the Pacific. And all of this kind of got pushed down by a cold front. A little bit of vorticity broke off and began to rotate and got some thunderstorm activity. And Tropical Depression 14 was born. Now, this is going to move across the Gulf of Mexico, and unfortunately, it looks like it's going to stay far enough away from the cold front to intensify. The Hurricane Center thinks it kind of slow at first, about another tropical storm for another day or two, but then by Monday evening, or Monday morning, rather, they have this becoming a hurricane, passing north of the Yucatan Peninsula and making landfall in the day on Wednesday along the west coast of Florida, as very likely a major hurricane. They have it at 110 miles an hour right now in their discussion at 7 a.m. on Wednesday, but they absolutely note that a stronger storm is very possible. And this looks pretty bad for Florida in a couple of different ways. Number one is hitting the west coast of Florida around that Tampa region, maybe north or maybe south. Now, that will matter dramatically for the storm surge threat, but wherever the south of where this comes in will have another chance of very destructive storm surge. I don't know if it'll quite be as bad as Helene's surge, but it may be pretty close. We may be talking about a very bad storm surge threat given this thing's trajectory and potential intensity at landfall. We also have the threat of a potential heavy rainfall event across the northern half of Florida because this system, as it moves across, will be interacting with a cold front that's going to be draped across this area. We'll show you some of this, but this could focus a corridor of very heavy flooding rainfall across northern Florida. Jacksonville, that could be you. There could be a lot, going on with this, and this could overall be a very high impact, event for the state of Florida. And this is going to be at a time where resource management, FEMA, things like that are already very strained from the massive response required from Hurricane Helene. So there's a lot going on with this, guys. Looking at satellite presentation on TD14 today, this is the core of the storm, this thunderstorm activity here along the western coast of the Gulf of Mexico. One of the things that's helping enhance TD14 and got it spinning up faster than we expected is the interaction with the mountains of central Mexico. What you have is winds coming down from Texas, and then what we call a barrier jet. We have a jet moving along the terrain of the coast here and helping to push winds down to the south and over to the east, and this is kind of helping close off that vorticity area faster and kind of giving this a little bit of an artificial boost of spinning. So this is kind of sort of how Francine got started, and it's not too dissimilar of a general pattern where you have the tail end of a cold front, you have a low pressure develop, it sinks down, the barrier jet kind of spins it up, and then everything carries off. Now, Francine turned a bit more to the north because of the way the troughs are interacted, but with this cold front laid across the Gulf of Mexico, this 14, what will become Tropical Storm Milton by tonight or tomorrow, will have a more westerly or easterly track rather towards Florida. But unfortunately, this leg of its journey looks quite good. Let's go ahead and take a look at a couple different computer models, give you an idea of how this plays out. GFS going into early this week does have the spinning up really quick, and by Monday afternoon already has this as a significant hurricane north of the Yucatan Peninsula as we can carry through the GFS. And you can see here this pretty consistent signal of rain to the north, meaning this is where that front is going to kind of keep this thing pushed down. You can see here, though, the GFS moves off, intensifies it quickly into a major hurricane, and brings us in just north of Tampa. Now, this image I'm showing you is the worst case scenario. We have talked about Tampa with all these other storms, our Ians, our Debbies, our Helenes, our Irmas, all these storms that have passed near Tampa. And we saw with Helene that Tampa got 6 to 8 feet of storm surge from a hurricane that passed 100 miles plus offshore to your west. This storm is coming straight towards y'all. Now, if this storm winds up moving further south towards Cape Coral and Punta Gorda and Fort Myers and whatever else, or even comes in a little bit south of Tampa Bay, the storm surge threat will be a lot less. It will not be zero, but it will be less. If this storm takes any more of a northerly track and comes in right around here, this would be catastrophic for the Tampa Bay area, guys. I cannot jump up and down on the table and stress this enough. And you know, we said things like this with Helene. And I'm going to say it again. Something like this for Tampa Bay would be the worst storm you guys have taken in more than 120 years, probably ever. And the difference in population and money and resources that are there is nothing like the Tampa Bay hurricane in the 20s was. This would be a storm like that, and it would cause a catastrophic storm surge in the Tampa Bay, and the losses would be probably the costliest hurricane in U.S. history. Okay, I don't want to act like I'm trying to hype this up, but that's the threat that is on the table for Tampa Bay right now. Okay, so you guys in Tampa and Sarasota and all those areas around there need to take this direly seriously and take every preparation and precaution you will take, because the flooding and the surge could be twice as bad as Helene was if this comes in on this track, okay? The other thing I'm looking at is you look at this model, look at the northern part, look at all this heavier precipitation returns on the GFS, returns here for northern Florida. What you're also going to have is a strong high pressure set to the north. So you're going to have high pressure ridging in this way and a very intense low pressure pulling in this way. So on the northern side of the storm, there could be a very heavy rain corridor setting up, and the potential for significant widespread flooding across northern Florida is actually pretty high. We could be talking about 1 foot to 2 feet of rain for northern Florida. This could stretch down more towards Orlando, Ocala, central northern Florida, more towards the Big Bend area. But there's going to be a dramatic drop-off towards the Panhandle and some of the places that were hit by Helene, because dry air will be trying to come in on the backside of this front. But where you fall on the wrong side of that front, a lot of heavy rain could be coming. I can show you some other models. Euro is a little bit different here. Euro comes up again a bit further south and a bit weaker. So if something like this were to happen, where the core of the hurricane comes in further south, Tampa Bay would be spared the worst of the storm surge. You would still get a lot of bad weather. And you see what happens is that corridor of heavy rain shifts more into central Florida, and then northern Florida kind of escapes the worst of it. So there's going to be two things. Simultaneously, we're going to be managing that big storm surge threat to the south of where the eye makes landfall, and to the north of where the eye makes landfall, you're going to have a very heavy rain axis set up across many different counties, okay? It's too early to tell you exactly what this looks like as far as landfall. I think pretty much like around like that Fort Myers area to probably about Cedar Key, maybe just a bit south of Cedar Key is probably your goalpost. I don't think it gets much further north than Tampa, and I don't think it gets a ton further south than Tampa, like Keys or something like that. That's probably about your goalpost for this landfall. Some of the reasons this could be quite intense is we look at the overall wind shear pattern across the Gulf of Mexico, and at first glance, you may say, well, there's some decent westerly winds there. I mean, this looks like it's going to have some wind shear, and you're right. It's going to have about 15, 20 knots of wind shear. There's two problems, though. Number one, this is a westerly wind shear, and this is moving in the direction of the storm. So if your storm is, say, moving along at 7 or 8 miles an hour, and you've got 20 miles an hour of shear, you have to subtract that shear, the movement from the shear. So if I actually, average that down, the shear is less because the winds are moving with the storm, not against the storm's general motion. Number two, this is kind of like a shallow layer shear. It's a very, it's very unidirectional, and so the trough is very broad, and there's not a lot of different changes of direction, so it doesn't inhibit the thunderstorms from rising as much as a stronger and a little more offset shear would be. So you also do have this little jet streak interaction across northern Georgia and across the Carolinas that will also help to ventilate the storm, pull away mass, something kind of like what did with Helene as it approached, where that trough actually helped the storm ventilate a little bit. So given this setup over very warm water and with the front close enough for some interaction, but not a ton, the only hope we really have is dry air. GFS doesn't really show that happening until basically landfall. We can see it takes all the way till landfall for a dry slot to start to work into the storm. By then it would be too late. European shows a little bit different setup. The European has more dry air moving into this. So you can see the Euro keeps it weaker because dry air invades that backside of the storm much more than it did on the GFS. So that's a possibility. You can see here on Tomer Berg's website the heat map with our multi-model consensus overlay showing that potential for, that landfall kind of, you can see that kind of landfall goalpost is pretty much something like that. But again, this will carry across the state of Florida and impacts will be felt through Florida, both north and south of landfall. Pretty much, again, only that western panhandle is going to escape any significant impacts. And if we go up on his website to the actual intensity for initial intensity, the Hurricane Center throwing us out as at least 110 mile an hour storm going into later on in the week is also near their record for percentile rank for like intensity increases. So the Hurricane Center is going hard on this again, just like they did Helene. And remember how good their first Helene forecast was. This could be similar. Suite of models here, a bit further north and a bit further south of the official forecast track. The Hurricane Center lying more in that northern envelope of the tracks. Some models still think this comes in further south, but again, it will kind of be tied to intensity. A stronger storm will probably lift a bit further north. A weaker storm may trend further west. It explains our Euro GFS difference. And intensity right now, Hurricane Center basically right at the start of Category 3. Some models are even hinting at potential Category 4. So that's not good news. Rainfall to come. If I just kind of show you up here on the GFS, look at that heavy rainfall axis potential. And this is shifted, but look at this corridor. This is 10 to 15 inches of rain, sometimes more. Look at the potential for St. Johns County, 18.86. Again, that's just a general area. It's not like St. John's is specifically going to get that much rain, but you can see that that potential for heavy rain is lying across northern Florida on the GFS run that comes more into Tampa and just north of Tampa, whereas some models that have it further south have a little bit less rain. And then if I look at the WPC and kind of show you their official forecast, you can see a lot of 4 to 8 inches of rain for the east coast of Florida. This will also create a nor'easter event. As it's approaching, you'll have a lot of strong onshore flow coming in ahead of the hurricane. So you're going to have, just like with Helene, a rainfall event. That rain will fall through this week leading up to the hurricane on Wednesday. So you're going to have a couple days of rain before the actual main event of rain. Again, I don't want to use just like Helene, quote unquote, because this is a very different setup than what happened in the mountains of North Carolina and Tennessee. But still a very heavy rainfall event is likely as the storm approaches. You can see the wind gust potential, potentially pretty high. Jacksonville area, you could be in for something like you saw with Helene. Obviously, stronger winds across the whole northern part of Florida where this comes in, and the winds will be more concentrated to the northern half of the state more than the southern half, but tropical storm warnings may be up for the entire peninsula of Florida once again as the storm approaches. So that's what I got for you guys in this video. We're going to have more stuff on the Facebook page. We'll probably do another Facebook Live or two throughout the week. It's going to be a busy couple of days, and we will be tracking it every step of the way, guys. So that's what I got for you today. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.